So, what if one of the most dramatic climate events in Earth's history, the Ice Age, didn't actually happen millions of years ago? What if it fits directly into the timeline of the Bible? Well, today we're diving into a really fascinating theory that connects these two stories, and it suggests a single cataclysmic event triggered a global freeze. And right away, we hit the central puzzle, right? The words Ice Age are nowhere to be found in the Bible. So, how could such a huge event possibly fit into its framework? The theory we're looking at argues that the answer isn't in a specific name, but in the dramatic aftermath of a much more famous biblical catastrophe, the global flood. All right, so our first step is to figure out exactly where this massive geological event could possibly slot into the biblical narrative. Now, let's be super clear about one thing. The Ice Age was a very real event. I mean, the evidence is literally carved into our planet's landscape. You've got these huge U-shaped valleys. Massive boulders dropped hundreds of miles from where they started. So for this model, the question isn't if it happened, but when, and more importantly, why. This model completely flips the conventional timeline on its head. Instead of an event that happened millions of years ago, it proposes the Ice Age was a relatively short but incredibly intense period, lasting only a few centuries. It kicks off right after the Genesis flood, around 2500 BC, which puts it squarely within recorded human history. So this brings us to the core mechanism of the whole theory. How on earth could a world-covering flood, an event literally defined by immense heat and water, lead directly to a global freeze? It sounds totally backwards, doesn't it? You'd think more heat and more water would mean a warmer, wetter world, not a frozen one. But according to this model, those two things, hot water and lots of it, are the exact ingredients you need to create the perfect conditions for an ice age. The entire mechanism really hinges on how you interpret this one verse from Genesis. The phrase, fountains of the great deep, is understood here not as, some gentle springs, but as a description of something far more violent and on a massive geological scale. So this model proposes that these fountains were actually massive, simultaneous volcanic eruptions all across the ocean floor. This global tectonic event would have dumped an enormous amount of geothermal heat directly into the world's oceans, creating the first crucial ingredient for an ice age, unusually warm water. And this creates a kind of perfect storm scenario in 3 steps. Okay, so first, you have those superheated oceans, which leads to massive evaporation, just saturating the atmosphere with moisture. At the exact same time, step 2, the same volcanic eruptions that heated the water also filled the stratosphere with ash and aerosols. This created a kind of sun shield, causing cooler summers, especially over the big continents. And the result? All that moisture in the air fell as relentless, heavy snow over those cool land masses. And because the summers weren't warm enough to melt it, the snow just kept piling up year after year, compressing into the giant ice sheets of the Ice Age. But this theory isn't just about geology. If an intense ice age really did happen this recently, it means humans were there to see it. So how did our early ancestors actually navigate this newly frozen world? I mean, the scale of this was just immense. The Laurentide ice sheet, which you can see here, buried most of Canada and the northern US under ice that was up to 2 miles thick. When you lock up that much of the world's water on land, the sea levels don't just fall, they plummet. And this dramatic drop in sea level had some really profound consequences. It exposed land bridges that were normally underwater, basically creating highways for migration after the dispersion at Babel, most famously connecting Asia to North America. This new, harsh climate totally shaped human culture itself. Survival in those colder regions demanded nomadic, hunting lifestyles. And really, it's no surprise that the first great civilizations we know of, like Mesopotamia and Egypt, all popped up in the warmer, ice-free parts of the world. Okay, but if the Ice Age really happened within this biblical timeframe, could there be an eyewitness account hidden somewhere in the scriptures? Well, proponents of this theory believe there is, and they point to one of the oldest books in the Bible, the Book of Job. Now, to get the connection, we first have to place Job on the timeline. There's several clues in the text that suggest he lived in the patriarchal era, long before Moses. For instance, he acts as his family's priest, which was a pre-Levitical practice. His super long lifespan and his wealth being measured in livestock also lines up perfectly with those early post-flood generations. This timing is absolutely crucial because it would place him right in the middle of the proposed ice age. And it's in the poetic language of Job that we find some really intriguing descriptions. I mean, think about this, where God asks Job about the treasures of the snow. That phrasing suggests more than just a winter flurry.
It brings to mind vast, stored-up quantities of snow, an image that would be perfectly at home in a world of glaciers and huge snowfields. But maybe the most striking passage is this one, describing the face of the deep as being frozen solid. Now, if you're living in a temperate climate, that's a pretty strange metaphor. But in an ice age world, that's a literal description of large frozen lakes or maybe even sea ice, a common sight for someone living in a much, much colder climate.
So, beyond the geology and the history, this framework also suggests a really deep theological meaning. The Ice Age isn't seen as just some random climate event, but as a physical chapter in a much larger spiritual story. From this perspective, the world after the flood wasn't just a simple return to the perfection of Eden. Instead, the harsh, unstable climate of the Ice Age serves as this powerful, physical reminder of a world that's still bearing the scars of judgment and brokenness. And this whole idea of a struggling creation is echoed centuries later in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul writes about the whole creation groaning as if it's in pain. Within this model, the extreme climates, the animal extinctions, and just the general hardship of the Ice Age are seen as a powerful, literal example of that very groaning. But this groaning isn't the end of the story. The harshness of that post-flood world is ultimately contrasted with the biblical promise of a future restoration, a new heavens and a new earth, where the instability and trauma of the old world will finally be healed. And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. If this model is an accurate reflection of history, it totally reframes the dawn of human civilization. It suggests that our earliest post-Babel cultures were forged not in some calm, stable world, but in the crucible of extreme climatic challenge. It paints a truly remarkable picture of human resilience and of survival against the backdrop of a world still reeling from catastrophe.